Hey, welcome back to another episode of LeaderShipping. E-commerce growth has been on a steady rise for decades. It's no mystery that the COVID-19 pandemic gave that growth a massive boost. The increase in e-commerce inevitably is also creating an increase in e-commerce returns. In fact, the value of items returned by consumers globally nearly tripled, which is crazy, capping it at 1.8 trillion in the most recent numbers in 2022. For shippers, returns are an absolute nightmare. They're costly, unsustainable, and a pain in warehouses. Many have just accepted that they're a burden and a way of life and that they basically have to endure. But I think it doesn't have to be that way. Returns can also and should also be improved upon, and that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today with our guest, Kyle Bertin. Kyle, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Caleb. I appreciate you having me here today.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to give our listeners a little bit of background information about who you are and where you came from. If I miss anything, please feel free to correct me. But as far as I know, Kyle is co-founder and CEO of Two Boxes, a software company dedicated to turning returns into a competitive advantage for shippers and 3PLs alike. After beginning his career with a different focus, Kyle fell into logistics roles, as many of us do, and I think once you get it in your blood, it's really hard to get out of it. He helped shape the strategies of various logistics companies such as Flexport, Outrider, seeing a need for a returns-focused solution. He co-founded Two Boxes. So Kyle, thanks so much for joining me, man. I'm really excited to be able to chat with you about this. I think there's some really interesting ways that we can have this discussion where listeners right now who are brands themselves and 3PLs are having some serious problems with returns. My first question to you is, what makes returns so dang hard? And how did that
Yeah,
lead to you starting Two Boxes?
sure thing. Well, yeah, you got the intro pretty much spot on there. So thanks for that, Caleb. Yeah, I think what makes returns hard. I mean, you kind of have to like take, I'd say, a little bit of a big step back and just think about how supply chains work today, right? Everything in supply chain and logistics is it's really focused on getting, especially in the last 20 years, is really focused on getting a product from a manufacturer to a consumer's home, which is a big change, not to a retail store as much anymore. I mean, obviously, retail is still a huge component of just purchasing behavior in the United States, but it's been this big focus on how do I get a good from a manufacturer to a consumer home, better, faster, cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's what companies like Amazon in particular have just created incredible capabilities to do in the last 20 years or so. Um, and because of the way that we buy online now, when you return, most people, when they return a purchase that is bought online, they return at rates of 20% or more.
Yeah.
Some high return rate e-commerce verticals are 30, 40, 50%
Yeah.
return rates.
I was going to say there's
Um,
probably some products that have a significantly higher return rate just for the nature of it. Shoes, right?
Shoes. Most of the shoe brands that we see today on our platform have 30 to 35, sometimes 40% return rates.
Crazy.
Um, and so there's this incredible amount of volume that's coming back, and that's just frankly a very different problem for logistics operators to deal with, right? Because logistics operators have been used to retail return rates when you return in a store are 5-ish% or
Yeah.
sometimes even less, right? So
Yeah.
it's just a order of magnitude difference. And so I think the biggest difference is, okay, well, you have products that are coming back from sort of all points back to single warehouses, right? Number one. Number two, when a product is received and it's a return, that return actually needs to be inspected. It needs to be, confirmed that that's the inventory that was actually purchased, and then that the quality of that inventory needs to be confirmed. Can it be resold as a first quality item to another, person like Caleb, or it doesn't need to be donated or thrown in the trash or something else, right?
Yeah.
Um, and that is just something where it's very hard to find anybody in the industry who's thought through this problem at scale and solved it at scale, right? Of hey, when I'm a 3PL who's receiving a new shipment of goods for one of my brand customers, right? Like I'll pick on you. It looks like you're wearing a Howler Brothers shirt,
Yeah,
right? Great
yeah,
brand.
I love their
So
stuff, right?
so
Yeah,
Howler Brothers, right? When they receive a new shipment of inventory from their supplier, right? It's all sorted, it's all clean, it's all first quality, right? They just have to receive that inventory into the warehouse, break it down into individual SKUs, put it away, and then when an order comes in, pick, pack, ship, right? Now imagine instead that you get a pallet of returns, right?
yeah,
That returns is mixed goods, mixed quality. You don't even know what's in it in a lot of cases. So it's a very, very different problem that has a lot more operational intensity. And it's made worse in the warehouse that most of the customers that we serve are third-party logistics providers. And those customers don't just serve one brand. They don't just serve Holler Brothers, right? They
yeah,
serve 50, 100, 500 brands per location. And so when you start to think about the kind of mushroom of complexity here of lots of different brands whose merchandise is coming back from different channels, they sell different things that need to be inspected for different quality conditions, it starts to kind of make your head hurt. And that's a little taste, I would say, of the problem.
yeah. I would also, I mean, to you bringing up Howler Brothers, I think that's one of those things that as a consumer, we all have those moments of, oh crap, I ordered the wrong size, which happens.
Hmm.
But then it is every business seems to have a slightly different return policy or process,
Yep.
right? Oftentimes, the brands that have that really care about loyalty, I think really ultimately what that is they are not just thinking about getting the product out the door to my clientele faster, which I think is kind of that first step, right? Which is fast 2-day shipping is on most brands' minds, but it's the entirety of that life cycle. Hey, if 20 or 30% of my product is going to be returned to me, what does that client experience look like? How terrible actually is it, or how difficult are we making returns? I think ultimately that process really depends on um, a brand's ability to say, look, I really care about my client and I want to make the return process easy. And oftentimes I find that, I've got 2 returns right now that have just been kind of sitting around because, frankly, the return process has been really challenging. I,
Hmm.
I think, with all of that in mind, client experience and the difficulty of just the return process of getting boxes in variety of conditions with variety of product from variety of brands if you're a 3PL. Walk us through how 2 boxes helps simplify returns management then.
Sure. So you really hit something on the head, which is I think client experience, that end customer, buyer experience has been the biggest focus in returns technology over the last, decade.
Yeah.
And there's been a ton of great companies, many of whom we partner with, that have built some amazing things like Loop Returns, Happy Returns, Aftership,
Yeah.
Narbar, etc. These companies, I'd say by and large, are there ways to improve? 100%, but it has never been easier for you and I as a buyer to return something that we've bought online than it is in 2024,
Yeah.
right?
True. Yeah.
And so, that experience is what a lot of retailers and brands have really focused on. Now let's walk through a return, right? And then we'll talk about how kind of 2 boxes plugs in. So if you buy online, let's exclude Amazon from this because Amazon's a little bit of a different beast, very vertically integrated. They have built all their technology, all their returns go back to their own return processing focused warehouses, actually. So it's a little bit different, right? But if you buy something from Holler Brothers, I can't remember who they use. I think it might be Loop. So let's just say that it's Loop. You go and return a Holler Brothers shirt because it didn't fit. You're going to go to what looks like a Howler Brothers website, but it's actually a Loop website.
Yeah.
You're going to enter some information to look up your order. You're going to answer some questions. You're going to select a refund or an exchange. You're going to get a shipping label to print out and stick it on the package, or you'll get like a QR code to be able to drop it off at a consolidation point. Like lots of people have had this experience. I think it's a pretty good experience for most consumers of being able to walk into a retail location and drop off your return in a boxless, labelless kind of environment,
Yeah.
right? So that experience has been what most people have focused on, right? How do we make it easy for Caleb to get his return back into the parcel network, to get it back into a warehouse, right? And then what people don't see is then once your returns head back to all these warehouses, right? The majority of those warehouses are not run by the brands themselves. They are run by third-party logistics providers who serve lots of different brands, right? And
Yeah.
those 3PLs, as we talked about earlier, have highly optimized these facilities for outbound logistics, for receiving new inventory in that's fresh and clean and shipping it out to Caleb's house. Now, what's really been become problematic is the way I've been kind of describing this recently is all these returns and all this innovation that makes it easier and faster and cheaper for Caleb to initiate his return means it's like a 5-lane super highway of returns
Yeah.
that come into these warehouses. And nowadays it's just like a huge pile up, in that warehouse where,
Yeah.
okay, if I'm that 3PL, I've got 100 different brands and I got all this different stuff that I need to be able to deal with. And that's really where we come in and we build, a lot of product that I'm happy to jump into there. But Caleb, did you have a question?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that there is this duality, like this double-edged sword of the easier we make it, um, the more loyal our client base is going to be.
Hmm.
But the downside is the easier we make it, the more flooded we're going to have on the complexity of returns that we're either going to, for brands that are doing it themselves, manhandle and push that through, or it falls on a 3PL that they've outsourced this to process all this through. And I think ultimately, it, you'll never be in a bad spot if you put your client first. And I
Yeah.
think client loyalty is there, but there's probably some bad actors um,
Oh, yeah.
in that mix too, right? That
Yeah.
how do you sift through that, and how are you able to kind of categorize that so that not? I think it's really interesting that we think of returns as the same thing, but not all returns are created equal, and not all
Yeah.
returnees are created equal too.
Yeah. No, 100%. And this is one of the biggest things that we focus on, and one of the things that I believe will change most dramatically over the next decade, right? Is I think people really need to understand, like, I was having a conversation at the Manifest conference with the CEO of or the essentially the segment leader for a publicly traded 3PL.
Yeah.
And he was, saying how people really don't understand that we're still in like the earliest innings of e-commerce, number one, and returns were like, in the earliest of innings, right? Maybe we're in like the fourth inning of e-commerce, and we're in like the first pitch of returns, right? And
Right.
so I think, all these things that we take for granted on how efficient and data driven outbound logistics are really weren't a thing 20 years ago.
Right.
Right. I mean, I remember, I'm 36 years old. I remember when I was a kid buying like football cleats. There was no, online. I didn't buy it online. I bought it through an Eastbay catalog, and I waited 6 weeks for my cleats to come. Right.
Yeah.
It's a very different, we're in a different just world now. And so what I really think here is, yes, there's very limited ability for brands and 3PLs to actually understand what's happening in the return stream because they don't have the right tools. And that's what we're enabling now with 2boxes is we're building the right tools in the warehouse for any operator or brand who's running their own facilities to process all their returns regardless of the channel that they come back, whether they come through Loop or Happy or a custom portal or whatever it is, and then be able to inspect that inventory according to the right standard operating procedures or SOPs down to that SKU level of
Yeah.
the shirt you're wearing has buttons, my t-shirt under this does not, right? So we're inspecting them for different, attributes, so to speak,
Right.
and then tracking the ultimate, inventory decision of was it first quality or not? And we can tie all that back to the consumer, right? And so this is where with companies like 2boxes and frankly, I expect there to be many more, and there's lots of incumbents as well. We're starting to bring more data into the return stream, and that data in the return stream should impact everything that you're talking about, right? Just to give you a sense of scale, last year, according to the National Retail Federation, about 14% of returns in the United States were fraudulent, and they cost retailers and brands over $100 billion
I'm sorry.
alone last year.
I'm sorry. 14% of all returns were fraudulent.
Yep. And
That's crazy.
fraudulent, really breaks down into, the common things that we see. About that same number, by the way, in our data set, we see.
Yeah.
And really the things are empty box returns, especially with higher priced goods. It's, hey, somebody buys a $500 cookware set and returns an empty box. We see that just about every day. Or, hey, the other thing is return policy abuse, right? Wardrobing, as a lot of people will call it, where, not only does Caleb buy three shirts because he doesn't know the good version of Caleb is he buys three shirts and doesn't know which one's going to fit. The bad version of Caleb is he buys three shirts, he wears them for 2 weeks, and then he sends them back, right? We see a lot of that, right? And so this is where, though, you're right. It's not that there's a huge majority of people who are bad consumers, but there's enough of these people who are bad consumers and they purchase and return at such high rates. And there's actually, like, literally, Caleb, there's like Telegram communities, books being sold, like all these things online around how do you actually defraud returners, basically, so you can get free stuff. How do you defraud? How do you defraud brands so you can get free stuff? So this is the type of thing where we really think that bringing data into this picture enables us to serve the brands and serve our partners as well in a really holistic way of, hey, we can paint a picture of, is Caleb a good returner or not? And should Caleb get a great return policy, a bad return policy, or ideally not even be able to purchase from the brand? And that's really where I think the world is going and needs to go. And I think consumers need to be a part of the solution as well. I expect that you'll see a lot of, kind of loyalty programs, that sort of thing pop up where, hey, Caleb, if you opt in to, share your data, et cetera, you'll get access to free returns with your favorite brands, right? Because it's such a big problem, and we're still in the earliest innings of it, that retailers and brands are going to have no choice but to figure out how to solve it.
Oh, absolutely. And I would bet that along with the fraudulent activity, which it blows my mind, 14% of returns are fraudulent. And it makes sense, right? You don't have people who are, just stealing. You have people, like you mentioned, that wear the item for a couple of weeks and return it, and they do that systematically, and they are serial abusers of brands. And I think using data to determine which ones, not all consumers are created equal, that there's going to be some consumers that are abusing the system, and you should be able to, if you're a brand, you should be able to use your data to identify which of those consumers are causing you the most amount of pain, and or literally stealing from your business. That makes all the sense in the world to me. I think there's also a component of reducing landfill and waste, sustainability side of this, right? I mean, a lot of brands I talk to, sustainability has been at the forefront more this year than I've seen in the last 5. Which is really more of a focus on, how do I reduce my carbon footprint? How do I reduce how much ends up in a landfill? And how much waste do I have? I'm assuming there's a pretty good amount of waste with returns.
Yeah, 100%. So these numbers are a little bit old, but from 2022, there were about 10 billion pounds of returns that were landfilled in the United States. It's depending on who you talk to and what research reports you read and data you review. The best that I've been able to figure out is that about half of returns are ultimately landfilled.
Wow.
And really, I'd say there's a few drivers that we truly believe are kind of the main causes. Number one is just the cost and quality of the item, right? So the sad truth is, if you buy like a $20 phone case on Amazon, that good cost of goods from the manufacturer is like, it can't be more than $4 for that brand to be making money.
Right.
And so, hey, there's just not a lot of, it doesn't make sense, right, to ultimately tell Caleb to ship the thing back and pay for transportation and processing to give that thing a second life. This is why Amazon increasingly will tell you, hey, just keep these things, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of those things end up in the trash because people don't find a second home for them. So I'd say that's kind of number one. Number two is just velocity. So going back to this, sort of metaphor of 5-lane highway merging into a country road in the warehouse, especially around this time of the year, January, February, March, that first quarter is like the return Super Bowl because everybody returns a bunch of stuff that they bought for the holidays, right? Um, and what you see is a lot of these goods come into these warehouses, and because warehouses are really not designed to receive and process them efficiently, they sit for a really long time. Um, I have a brand right now on the screen actually over here that I was just looking at for some case study data where their return volumes in the month of February 10x'd from
Wow.
January
Wow.
because they that were processed through two boxes, and that's because they had this huge backlog of returns from December and January that weren't processed in the warehouse until February,
Yeah.
right? So 10x increase. Now, the big problem with velocity is fashion is perishable, right? Has a very, very steep decay curve. And so if I buy something in December and it's not processed in the warehouse until February, March, I've heard horror stories of like April from brand operators where, hey, this stuff's going to sit there, and even if somebody in the warehouse is doing their job really diligently and determines that, hey, the shirt that Caleb's wearing is in perfect condition, tags on it, all that, well, guess what? The brand has already fully discounted that
Yeah.
and doesn't want that thing, resold, and doesn't want it entering a liquidation channel,
Yeah.
especially for
Totally.
highly branded merchandise.
Yeah.
So you see that as another waste stream. And then the third one that's really we are attacking as aggressively as we can is not only is there fraud in this stream, but there's also supplier quality issues where it isn't caught until too late. Where we've been able to help brands see that, hey, by the like, for example, there's a apparel brand that we work with where they have about a 90% return to stock rate through two boxes, and we noticed that they launched a new SKU. And the first about dozen returns that came back were all going into the donation bin, and they were all going in the donation bin for the same reason. And so we were able to identify, hey, that's a supplier quality defect, notify the brand, and help the brand save, a significant amount of money. So that's where I think, the returns data you know, is not just usable in a silo. It actually should inform manufacturing. It should inform return policies. It should inform so many other things that it can't be used for today because it simply can't be stored and utilized in a scalable way. And that's what we're trying to change.
Yeah. And I would think that um, you're helping brands be significantly more proactive in their interactions with their customers.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and I think that use case of a manufacturing defect and seeing that in real time data would typically go unnoticed for a large brand um, for I would say maybe a couple of months, if not a couple of quarters. And then it would
Hmm.
finally be like, hey, what is going on with this brand, or what is going on with this particular SKU, and why are we having problems with it? And I think in my conversations with brands, just about every single day, they are focused on how do I become more, um, how can I predict things a little bit better? How do I become a little bit more fast and nimble by utilizing data that's in front of me to make better informed decisions rather than something that is less proactive. I think that's a
Hmm.
really great call out. And I would bet that there is a competitive advantage with this process. Meaning, if you've got listeners here who are brands or 3PLs themselves, why should they invest in a really robust return process? Like, what is the
Yeah.
value for them?
Yeah. Let's start with the brands, and I actually want to. You mentioned this word predictive, right? Which there's one other thing I wanted to talk about in terms of waste and the opportunity to eliminate that. But let's start with brands, right? So for brands, like, why do you need to invest in this, right? I think you need to invest in this because if you're an average e-commerce brand, you likely have 20+% of your items being returned,
Right.
and it is no longer acceptable from a financial and sustainability and frankly to a certain extent like moral kind of
Yeah.
perspective to just say like, hey, we're not going to care about 20% of the stuff that comes back. We're not going to care if it gets returned to stock. We're just going to buy more inventory, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
To a large extent, that was really the attitude when we started the company. If I'm being really transparent, we would talk to brands and we'd say like, hey, can you tell me anything about your 30% of your stuff that comes back? And you talk to the CFO of a large brand and they look you in the face and go, no, I can't. And honestly, I don't really care because I'll just go buy more
Yeah.
inventory from my supplier for pennies on the dollar because I'm in a zero interest rate environment back in, in 2022. Um, at this point, the macro economy has just changed dramatically. And I think most brands have shifted from this growth at all costs mindset that was really pervasive from like 2015 to 2022 to, oh gosh, we actually really need to turn a profit and we need to be really thinking about every lever in the business to do that.
Right.
And so I think from a brand perspective, if you're not really understanding your return P&L and you don't really understand the levers that you can pull to improve that, it's a huge opportunity for you. I can just tell you if you're a brand right now, if you come to me and you tell me like what percentage of your revenue you're spending on fulfillment, I can tell you like, hey, you're getting a good deal or not,
Yeah.
right? Because it's just kind of established. But in returns, it's just such low hanging fruit. And that low hanging fruit not only benefits your P&L, it's going to really benefit your relationship with your logistics providers by using more advanced tools like 2 boxes, and really comes back to the customer, right? Because brands right now are really in this pickle of like, how do I enable this awesome customer experience? Like Caleb initiates his return, he gets his money back right away.
Yeah.
Well, by doing that, you're instituting a ton of risk to you as the brand, right? If I give Caleb his refund before I've received his inventory, which has become the status quo for a lot of high growth brands, there's a ton of risk in that decision. And the alternative is, hey, wait to refund Caleb until his item is received and inspected. And that's not a good experience either because Caleb might wait 3-4 weeks for his refund. I had a
Yeah.
terrible experience like that with a brand that I love. I love this brand. And I'll still buy from them probably because I just love their product so much. But I sent them a pretty terse email of like, you guys got to improve this, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's sort of on the brand side, right? You're going to get more profit. You're going to manage your inventory better. You're going to be able to predict it better with tools like 2boxes. We can help brands predict how much inventory is going to be restocked and likely when based on the data that we have. So we're helping a lot of brands right now buy less inventory because they can count on the return stream as a replenishment source. Right. And then, kind of last but not least, you're going to serve your customers and be a better steward of the planet. So
Hmm.
that's sort of my brand pitch. Any comments or questions on
No,
that before we
I
talk
think
about 3PLs?
I think the loyalty aspect of brands is the holy grail. That's what brands want. They want a loyal client base that will reorder product from them, that are excited about new product being announced, that follow newsletters and don't mark it as spam in their inbox. And
Yep.
ultimately, how you do that is that you build this. I mean, why do people like Costco so much, right? I keep
Hmm.
going back to that mindset of like, um, there is such a brand loyalty to Costco, and I think it's just really interesting to see the Kirtland signature, which is their signature kind of house brand,
Yep.
be applied to everything. Like it's on golf clubs now. Like they're manufacturing golf clubs, and people are buying them. It's one of those things where it's like, how did they build? How did a discount box store, big box store, build such a strong, loyal client base? I think returns is such a huge piece of it. That those clients have this feeling of no matter what, Costco's going to get my back, and they're gonna let me return this, and I'm going to stay loyal, and I'm going to buy something else that's there. And I think they've done a really good job making that return process really easy. Granted, I think when you make that return process easy, you've got to have strong technology to manage it. I think specific to what you're doing in the marketplace makes total sense. I also think that from when you make it easier, that fraudulent abuse rate goes up, which means that you've got to be looking at your data to make sure that you're keeping in an alignment. But I think brands, this is everything. The 3PLs, on the other hand, are kind of like this operating on behalf of the brand, but not client facing. And that's a whole other world. Can you talk a little bit about the value that 3PLs would get in kind of returning, owning this return process a little bit stronger?
Yeah. So it surprises a lot of people that we talk to. This is actually our main customer base.
Yeah.
Um, is we enable the brands. I talked to a really awesome brand last night about something that they're running into and looking to work with us on, and I'm really excited to work with that brand. But in general, we serve the 3PLs, and I think the way that I kind of simplify this is if you run a 3PL, well, first off, a lot of people I think a lot of people think running a 3PL is easy. It is not,
No.
to do it well.
Yeah.
Um, it's a simple business, but it's really difficult. So, to break down this business, right? What are you doing? You're really running a business where it's a function. Your cost inputs are people and real estate, and of course capital equipment and whatever. But it's really people and real estate. And then your revenue function is how many how many things can I store and touch and ship, right?
Mm.
And so the more units that go through that facility with more velocity, the more times I touch something, the more times I ship something out, the more money that I make. And if I can do that with less labor and less real estate, all the better, right? Um, and there's been a ton of focus on outbound logistics to optimize, that forward motion, that return process is so archaic and inefficient in most of these warehouses, and that historically hasn't been a problem. But the thing that's really changed in the last few years is number one, this just huge increase in return volume. So, you said 1.8 trillion at the start of the show for like
Yeah.
global retail. In the US, just to give you a sense of scale, e-commerce returns are now about $250 billion a year. That is 8x in the last 5 years.
Oh,
So
that's
all
crazy.
this returns volume is coming into these warehouses for these operators who historically haven't had the tools to deal with them. Now, it's really difficult because, first off, if you're a 3PL and you want to win the fulfillment business and the transportation business for a high growth e commerce brand, you can't just say, I'm not going to take your returns. You
Hmm.
can, but it's gonna lower the probability that you win that deal. And so 3PLs are out there trying to compete for the same client base with largely a commoditized offering. And if you don't have a good returns capability, increasingly we've seen that brands will look elsewhere for somebody who will take that on because they don't want to split inventory, they don't want to have a bad return experience. So number one, I think it's a revenue opportunity for 3PLs to have great returns technology and processes because the average 3PL does not. Um, and so you are going to win more RFPs. You're going to put more volume through the facility. You're going to work with better, higher quality, larger volume brands if you can do this. And that is
Right.
played out in our customer base right now. Is we're helping 3PLs win more volume from better, more credible brands because they can deal with the returns using tools like two boxes. The second is really on the cost side. So right, that's the revenue side. Second is on the cost side. And it's really about how do I improve, units per hour per employee in the return section. Um, Kind of best of breed 3PLs when we first meet them are usually averaging somewhere in the range of like 15 to 20, maybe 25 units per hour through the return section per
Mm.
employee. Meaning like, hey, Caleb, if you got really good at this, you could do a return like every about 3 minutes or so,
Yeah.
if you're doing it like the old school way.
Yeah.
What we see is that we're actually enabling our customers to like increase that by 50% or more,
Mm.
where they're able to cut the time and the labor that it takes to do this. And because returns are usually priced on a per unit basis, they actually can pull a lot of margin out of the return process, right? And really importantly, they can make those employees happier. If you go do a facility tour at a large fulfillment center, and you'll usually it goes like this: you go walk around, and all the people in the fulfillment side are like using handhelds, and they've got like really cool tech, and there might be some robots running
Yeah.
around, and then you'll
Right.
eventually turn the corner, and it's always in the corner, and you'll find like the sad section. And it's the return section where people are like doing stuff
Yeah.
by hand and they're using spreadsheets and there's paper instruction manuals and like everybody in there, is got probably one of the worst jobs in the facility.
Yeah.
And now with two boxes, we're enabling our 3PLs to have a great technology driven process. And the end users that use our software, right, the warehouse associates, they rate our product super highly. We had a 92 NPS score last
Wow.
quarter from our warehouse associates. And that makes it a better experience for them, right? And at the end of the day, I'm a big believer that, technology enables, but people run supply chains. And so if you have great people in your warehouse who are excited and happy and using good tools, the service is just going to be better. That's one of the things I tell brands all the time. If you go or looking for a new 3PL, insist on a facility tour and just get a feel, like, are the people there happy? Like, is the facility clean? Like, are they excited to be working there? Because if the answer to that is no, you shouldn't work with that 3PL. And that's where we're starting to really, I think, drive more efficiency in the warehouses, because we're giving people the right tools. And then, last but not least, we're actually enabling 3PLs to identify opportunities to expand revenue and service for the merchants that they serve. So I'll give you an example. We have a 3PL customer right now where they serve a brand that has a highly seasonal product. It's swimwear. So they have a huge volume increase over the summer months, and they noticed that the number one reason that items were not being returned to stock was because of like slight stains, usually from like deodorant, when people tried on the
Mm,
swimwear and sent them back. And it was to the tune of like a couple $100,000 of inventory a month that was going into the recycle bin because it had slight defects with it. So the 3PL, using Two Box's data, said, hey, for an extra X dollars per unit, we can try to spot clean all these and get them into a condition that they can be resold as new, and we can retag them and etc. And it's a win-win, right? The 3PL makes more money, earns a little bit more margin. The
yeah.
brand gets more inventory, from, out of the trash can, so to speak, to be returned to stock, so they don't have to buy more inventory. So it's these types of things that I think we're bringing to the 3PL. It's more revenue, it's lower cost, it's happier employees, and it's identifying opportunities to better serve your merchant customers so that they're loyal to you and that they're going to stay in that facility for not 2 years, 3 years, but 7 years, 10 years. They're never going to try to go look for another partner.
Yeah, I think that's really a great call out, especially around a better employee experience. I mean, how much did we see that labor constraints was the number one driver for, FedEx, UPS, 3PL warehouses themselves in, 2021, 2022. And I think ultimately the better that of an experience you can have for your employees, the happier they're gonna be, and the better of a better job that they're gonna actually perform on behalf of you if you're a brand outsourcing your services to a 3PL. So that makes all the sense in the world. And I think with returns being at an all-time uh, growth clip that it's at right now, what's your final advice for shippers uh, going into 2024 when it comes to returns?
Yeah, I think for shippers, it's you got to start somewhere, right? So it doesn't mean that you have to run right into using, Two Boxes. We obviously think that everybody should, but we're biased. Um, but I think you have to start by understanding, what is the state of your returns. And it can be hard to do this, but like if you are a shipper and you don't have a P&L on your returns, you need to start doing that, right?
Mm,
You need to understand how much of your inventory is being returned, how much of it is being restocked, how much of it is being resold, what are the costs in this whole chain, and how can you optimize them? Because there's plenty of opportunities out there. So I think that's number one. Number two, I think it's really understanding how to serve your customers better and better. So like you talked about, Caleb, right? That's really at the name of the game for everybody, including Two Boxes, is making it a better end consumer experience. And so, there's lots of great data out there about what consumers are looking for nowadays. Narvar, for example, puts out an excellent report every year called like the State of Returns, I think they call it. If you're a shipper, I think you should be reading that every year, right?
yeah.
Of what are consumers demanding? What does the data show? What do they want? Right. So how can you make this a great consumer experience for the returns, section? And then, last but not least, I think it's, if you're running your own fulfillment center, I think it's go and do a tour, right? Like if you're a large brand and you're running your own fulfillment, go and do a tour in your fulfillment center and like talk to your employees and see what's happening and learn about how you can operationalize returns better. And if you're not running your own fulfillment center, go talk to your 3PL. The number of brands that I talk to where they literally don't know like what's happening to their returns, how their 3PL is dealing with it, how they can help. I think it shocks me. And there's this very healthy tension always between brands and 3PLs.
Yeah.
There's this joke in the industry of like, you just ask a brand about their 3PL and like you're never going to get more than a meh, out of them. And
Yeah.
I think it's always viewed as like the 3PL's fault, but in many cases it's a two-way street. And so I think it's if you're struggling with returns as a brand and you're using a 3PL, you got to talk to them. You got to understand, what are they doing? How are they doing it? Is there anything you're doing that's making their life harder? And how can you collaborate together to make this process better? Because if you do that, you're going to get more return inventory back to stock. You're going to lower your costs. You're going to improve that customer experience. And so I think that's my last call out there.
Yeah, I think that's a great call outs. I think you've dropped so many solid, really important pieces of information for brands and 3PLs to take and digest from a return standpoint. That this episode's been extremely valuable. So thank you so much for joining. Let us know, or let our listeners know, where they can be able to get in touch with you, the best ways to reach out to you. How can they interact with you?
Yeah, thanks, Caleb. I really appreciate that. So, a couple ways you can reach us. So our website is just www.twoboxes.com. That's TWO, boxes.com. You can check us out on LinkedIn, just under Two Boxes. Our team is trying to be pretty active on there. We meet a lot of customers on there. So, you can direct message me, and then, I'm probably getting towards the end of being comfortable with this, but, I get a lot of emails. My email is just kyle@twoboxes.com. You can reach me there if you want to email me as a brand or a 3PL. We'd love to meet you and see if we can help you. And I think, for most listeners that are shippers or 3PLs, we probably can help you. So shoot me a note. And then by the time this airs, it probably won't be, relevant, but we'll be at Modex and Shop Talk, and we will also probably be at Parcel Forum later this year.
Cool.
And we're also going to be doing a Two Boxes roadshow that I'm pretty excited about, which basically means that we're going to go to about a half dozen fulfillment markets all over North America this year to meet some of our current customers and partners in person and meet some prospective partners. So if you're a 3PL and you want us to come and check out your facility and show off the product and just give you some free advice, let us know where you're located, and we'll add you to the Two Boxes Roadshow tour this year.
Yeah, I love that idea. I think that roadshow idea is really cool. Well, I wish you the best of luck. Looking forward to running into you at Modex and a couple of the other shows you mentioned that Sifted will be at as well. And Kyle, this has been really helpful. Thank you so much for joining, man.
Thanks, Caleb. I really appreciate it.
Well, hey, thanks again for listening. Sifted is going to be at the Home Delivery World in June. If you're going to be there, reach out to me at caleb.nelson@sifted.com. We'd love to set up some time to chat. As for LeaderShipping, you can find more episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast platforms. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And I say this every time, but really, please leave us a rating or a review. If you've liked what you've heard, it really helps us kind of determine next steps with this and next topics we want to be able to focus on too. You can also watch these episodes on Sifted's YouTube channel and check out sifted.com for more information about us, along with some other great resources we have, like our blogs, monthly newsletters, and some helpful guides and research, and more. As always, thanks so much for listening. Catch you in the next one.